The solicitor, a man whose face seemed composed entirely of dry parchment and precedent, slid the document across the expanse of polished mahogany. It was a formidable thing, thick with clauses and bound in dark blue ribbon, the very color of obligation. Alistair Beaumont, the 8th Duke of Blackwood, did not read it. He had commissioned it, after all, and knew its contents as intimately as he knew the bloodlines of his hunting hounds. He dipped the quill in the inkwell, the scratching sound unnaturally loud in the cavernous silence of his London study. He signed his name with a flourish that was both practiced and utterly devoid of feeling. It was a signature that could transfer ownership of a county or condemn a man to ruin. Today, it was merely acquiring a wife. Across the table, Miss Eleanor Vance sat perfectly still. She was the other party in this transaction, the necessary component for securing the succession and settling a rather tedious dispute over a neighboring property that her family, in their genteel decline, still held some claim to. She was, he had noted in their few, brief meetings, unremarkable. Her hair was a shade of brown that resisted definition, her eyes a quiet gray, and she had a habit of looking at a point just past one's shoulder, as if the middle distance were more interesting than any person occupying the foreground. She was present, and she was absent. She was there, and she was not there. "Your turn, Miss Vance," the solicitor, Mr. Abernathy, prompted, his voice like rustling paper. Eleanor reached for the pen. Her hands were steady. She did not look at her future husband. She read the final page, her eyes moving with a fluid, disciplined speed that suggested a long acquaintance with the written word. Her gaze paused on Clause 17b. Alistair watched, a flicker of impatience crossing his features. It was a standard provision, insisted upon by his trustees. It was a formality. "A question, Your Grace," she said, her voice low but clear, without a tremor of nerves. It was the first time she had initiated a conversation with him. "Yes," he replied, his tone clipped. The business of the day was pressing. "Clause 17b, she stated, not looking up from the page. "It stipulates that the signature of the Duchess of Blackwood shall carry no legal weight on any document pertaining to the management, sale, or lease of any part of the Blackwood estate. All such matters are to be executed solely by the Duke or his appointed trustees." She finally lifted her eyes to his. They were not gray, he noticed with a jolt of surprise. They were the color of a winter sky just before snow, flecked with a startling, intelligent blue. "I am to be a duchess in name, but a legal nonentity in my own home." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the cool precision of a surgeon. Lord Sedgwick, one of the 2 trustees present and a man whose primary joy in life was the exercise of minor authority, cleared his throat. "A necessary precaution, my dear. The Blackwood estate is a vast and complex enterprise, not the sort of thing a lady need trouble her head about." Alistair felt a prickle of irritation, not at the clause, but at the delay. "The clause is non-negotiable, Miss Vance. It is a requirement of the trustees to protect the integrity of the ducal holdings. A matter of governance, you understand. Her signature means nothing on this estate. It is simply how things are done." He made a small, dismissive gesture with his hand. "Sign the document." The words hung in the air, stripped of all courtesy. Her signature means nothing. It was a truth made stark and brutal. For a moment, nothing happened. The ticking of the mantel clock seemed to grow louder, each second a small hammer blow against the silence. Eleanor looked from the Duke's impassive face to Lord Sedgwick's smug one. She looked at the line awaiting her name. She saw the shape of her future laid out in black ink on white paper, a gilded cage where her only function was to produce an heir and remain invisible. Then, she picked up the quill. Her movements were fluid, economical. She signed her name, Eleanor Vance, in a script that was as neat and unassuming as she appeared to be. The moment the signature was complete, she laid the pen down, precisely parallel to the edge of the document. She did not offer a smile or a word. She simply folded her hands in her lap and resumed her study of the middle distance, her expression unreadable. The transaction was complete. Alistair Beaumont had his Duchess, and Eleanor Vance had her contract, its 17th clause, a precise and permanent record of her worth. The wedding was a perfunctory affair, suitable for the union of a duke of immense standing and a gentlewoman of negligible importance. It was held in the family chapel at Blackwood Manor, the ancestral seat, a sprawling Gothic monstrosity of grey stone that seemed to frown down upon the manicured lawns. Eleanor wore a dress of cream silk that had belonged to her mother, altered to fit. It was elegant but austere, much like the bride herself. Alistair stood beside her, performing his role with the same detached efficiency he brought to all his duties. He said the vows, his voice resonant and clear. He placed the heavy gold ring, cold from the stone chill of the chapel, on her finger. He did not look at her face as he did so, but at her hand, which was slender and capable, but otherwise unremarkable. After the ceremony, they stood in a receiving line in the grand hall. Neighbors and tenants offered their congratulations. Alistair acknowledged them with a curt nod, his mind already on a letter he needed to write regarding a shipment of timber. Eleanor stood beside him, a faint, polite smile fixed on her lips. She was a statue of a duchess. He noticed, vaguely, that she never fumbled a name. When the elderly Mr. Finch, the estate manager for the past 40 years, approached them, his back stooped with age and loyalty, Alistair greeted him with familiar condescension. "Finch, all is well, I trust?" "As well as can be." "Your Grace," Finch said, his eyes watery. He then turned to Eleanor. "Your Grace," he murmured, bowing his head. "Welcome to Blackwood." "Thank you, Mr. Finch," Eleanor replied, and her smile, for the first time, seemed to reach her eyes. "I was so sorry to hear about your wife's lingering cough. I hope the honey and lemon tonic my aunt sent over from the vicarage provided some relief." Finch straightened up, his expression one of pure astonishment. "It did indeed, Your Grace. Most kind of you to remember. Most kind." Alistair frowned. He had not known Finch's wife was unwell. He had not known Eleanor had an aunt at the local vicarage. He had not known she was capable of this small, precise act of kindness and connection. It was an anomaly, a piece of data that did not fit his assessment of her as a quiet, unobtrusive blank slate. He filed it away as irrelevant and turned his attention to the next guest. Their first dinner as husband and wife was an exercise in silent formality. They sat at opposite ends of a dining table that could have seated 30. Courses arrived and were cleared away by footmen who moved with ghostly quiet. The vast emptiness between them was filled only by the clinking of silver on porcelain. Alistair found the silence acceptable. He preferred it. It allowed him to think. He thought about the drainage issues in the North Pasture. He thought about the upcoming vote in the House of Lords. He thought about the disappointing performance of his new racehorse. He did not, for a moment, think about the woman at the other end of the table. Eleanor, for her part, ate with quiet composure. She observed the room, the faded tapestry depicting a grim boar hunt, the way the candlelight caught the facets of the crystal glasses. She observed the footman, who had a slight limp. She observed the tiny chip on the rim of her soup bowl. She observed everything. After the meal, they retired to the drawing room. Alistair picked up a book on agricultural reform. Eleanor moved to the pianoforte in the corner, a beautiful instrument that was slightly out of tune. She lifted the cover. "Do you play, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice startling him from his reading. "I do not," he said, not looking up. She sat down and, without any preamble, began to play. The piece was complex, a Bach fugue that required both technical skill and intellectual rigor. Her fingers moved over the keys with a confidence that was entirely at odds with her subdued demeanor. The music was not gentle or sentimental. It was intricate, mathematical, and utterly compelling. It filled the cavernous room with a logic and a beauty that was undeniable. Alistair found himself listening. He lowered his book. The music was a surprise, much like her comment to Finch. It was another piece of data that did not fit. He had assumed her accomplishments, if any, would be of the usual, insipid variety. A little watercolor, some clumsy embroidery. This was different. This was mastery. When she finished, the final chord hanging in the air, he felt an unfamiliar impulse to say something, to acknowledge the performance. "You play well," he said, the words sounding stiff and inadequate. She turned on the bench, her expression calm. "My father insisted upon it. He said it was the only worthwhile discipline for a lady, as it taught mathematics and emotion in equal measure." "Indeed," Alistair said, having nothing else to add. He returned to his book, annoyed with himself for the lapse in his concentration. She was his duchess. Her purpose was defined. Her skills were irrelevant. He did not notice that she quietly closed the pianoforte and did not play again for the rest of the evening. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor settled into the rhythm of Blackwood Manor with a quiet efficiency that rendered her almost invisible. She managed the household staff with a light touch, resolving disputes and improving systems in ways that were felt but rarely seen. The meals improved. The laundry ran on a more sensible schedule. The constant tension that had existed under the previous perpetually flustered housekeeper seemed to dissipate like morning mist. Alistair was only dimly aware of these changes. He knew the house ran smoothly, but he attributed it to the natural order of things. It was what a duchess was for. One morning, he was in his study with Finch, going over the quarterly accounts. The estate manager was pointing to a column of figures with a worried expression. "The yield from the tenant farms in the West Valley is down again, Your Grace, by nearly 15%. Old man Hemlock says the soil is tired, that nothing will grow well there anymore." Alistair scowled at the ledger. "Hemlock has been saying the soil is tired for 20 years. The man is as tired as the soil. Offer him a new thatch for his roof and tell him to use more lime." "We tried lime last season, Your Grace. It made little difference." At that moment, there was a soft knock on the door. It was Eleanor, carrying a small tray with tea. It was a task a maid should have performed, yet she did it herself, placing the tray on a side table without a word. As she turned to leave, her gaze fell on the open ledger on the desk. She paused. "Forgive me," she said, her voice hesitant. "Is that the account for the West Valley Farms?" Alistair looked up, surprised that she would even recognize it. "It is. A tedious matter of declining yields." She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the columns of figures. "You have them planted with wheat again this year, and barley the year before." "Of course," Alistair said dismissively. "It is a wheat and barley rotation, as it has always been. The soil there is too acidic for cereal crops to be planted so consistently," she said simply. "My father experimented with a similar plot on our land. He found that a rotation of turnips and clover restored the nitrogen. The clover can be used for grazing, and the turnips to feed the livestock through the winter. It improves the soil and the animals both." She pointed a slender finger at the ledger. "You would lose a year of grain, but the subsequent yields would more than compensate for it. And Mr. Hemlock would have fodder for his dairy cow." There was a profound silence in the room. Finch stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. Alistair stared at her as if she had just sprouted a second head. He was the Duke of Blackwood. He had attended Cambridge. He had read treatises on modern agriculture. He had never been lectured on crop rotation by a woman in his own study. "That is an interesting theory, Duchess," he said, his voice laced with a cold condescension he could not suppress. "It is not a theory, Your Grace. It is a fact. You can see it detailed in Tull's Horse-Hoeing Husbandry, I believe, page 142. She gave a small, polite curtsy. "The tea is Earl Grey. I will not disturb you further." She slipped out of the room as quietly as she had entered, leaving an astonished estate manager and a thoroughly irritated Duke in her wake. "Well, I'll be," Finch muttered under his breath, looking at the Duke with a newfound respect for the woman who had just departed. Alistair said nothing. He walked over to the towering bookshelf that lined one wall, pulled down the heavy volume by Jethro Tull, and flipped through the pages. He found it on page 142. The discovery was galling. It was an affront to his authority and his intellect. That she was right was immaterial. That she had dared to be right, in his presence, before his own estate manager, was the problem. It was a disruption to the orderly, transactional nature of their arrangement. She was supposed to be a silent partner, a vessel for the Blackwood line, not a rural academic. He slammed the book shut. "Continue with the lime, Finch," he ordered, his jaw tight. "And send a note to Hemlock about his roof." Finch looked from the book to the Duke's thunderous face. "As you wish, Your Grace," he said quietly, but for the first time in his 40 years of service, the words were tinged with a faint, almost imperceptible note of disappointment. Eleanor did not mention the incident again. She retreated back into her quiet routines, a ghost in the machine of the grand house. But Alistair found he was now aware of her. He would catch himself watching her from across the dinner table, noting the intelligent stillness of her face. He would hear her speaking French to the governess of a visiting family with a fluency that put his own stilted, schoolboy efforts to shame. He saw her comforting a crying housemaid who had broken a piece of china, her voice low and kind, her hand a steady presence on the girl's shoulder. Each observation was a small, irritating grain of sand in the well-oiled machinery of his worldview. She was not the simple, unremarkable woman he had purchased. She was something other, something more complex. And he found he did not like it. It was an untidy variable in an equation he had considered solved. He resolved to put more distance between them. He spent more time in London, busying himself with politics and his club. He took a trip to his Scottish hunting lodge. He created a space around himself that she could not penetrate. When he was at Blackwood, he took his meals in his study and kept to his own wing of the house. He was reaffirming the terms of their contract through his actions. He was the Duke. She was the Duchess. Their paths were parallel lines, never meant to intersect. It was during one of his extended stays in London that Eleanor, seeking a book in the rarely used East Wing library, found the box. It was a simple pine crate tucked away on a high shelf, labeled Trustee Correspondence, 1836. Her hand was dusty as she pulled it down. Curiosity, a feeling she had long suppressed, stirred within her. She was looking for a book on botany, but this seemed suddenly more interesting. She carried the box to a reading table where a shaft of afternoon sun cut through the gloom. Inside were neat bundles of letters, tied with faded ribbon. Most were dry, financial matters, but one bundle was thicker than the rest, labeled Marriage Settlement. Her heart gave a small, painful thud. This was the genesis of her current life. She untied the ribbon with careful fingers. The letters were mostly between Alistair and Mr. Abernathy, the solicitor. She read through them, her expression calm, her mind absorbing the cold, transactional language. They discussed her dowry, the land dispute, the terms of the settlement, as if they were trading livestock. It was no more than she expected. Section. Then she found it. A letter from Alistair to Lord Sedgwick, dated 2 weeks before the signing of the contract. It was a reply to a query from the trustee about the management clause. Sedgwick had apparently suggested a more lenient version, one that would allow the Duchess some minor authority, some say in the running of the household accounts, as a gesture of goodwill. Alistair's reply was brutally clear. "Sedgwick," he had written in his sharp, decisive hand, "your sentimentality is misplaced. The girl is a necessary acquisition, nothing more. A gentlewoman of no particular fortune or connection, whose primary asset is her apparent meekness. To grant her any measure of control over the estate, however small, would be an act of profound foolishness. We do not know her character, her intelligence, or her inclinations. To assume competence where there is no evidence of it is the height of irresponsibility. The clause, as it stands, is not merely a precaution, it is a necessity. I will have it stated in the starkest possible terms. Her signature is to be meaningless. It will prevent any future ambitions she might develop. We are buying a broodmare, not a business partner. See to it that the wording is ironclad. Ironclad. Dunander dust. Dunander dust. Ironclad. Eleanor read the letter once. Then she read it again. The words did not incite rage. They did not provoke tears. They simply landed in the center of her being with the cold, heavy finality of a coffin lid closing. A necessary acquisition. Apparent meekness. A broodmare. He had not merely agreed to the clause, he had championed it. He had not just accepted the trustees' caution. He had been the architect of her legal nullification, based on an assessment of her that was as contemptuous as it was absolute. All her small hopes that he might one day see her, that a partnership of some kind, even one of respect, might grow withered and turn to ash. The man she had married did not just misunderstand her. He had, with careful, deliberate forethought, ensured she could never be anything more than the empty vessel he perceived her to be. She carefully folded the letter along its original creases. The precision of her movements was a testament to the immense control she was exerting over herself. She placed it back in the bundle. She tied the ribbon. She put the bundle back in the box and returned the box to the high, dusty shelf. She walked out of the library, leaving no trace of her discovery. A door inside her had not just closed. It had been locked, bolted, and barricaded. The key had been thrown into a very deep, very cold well. When Alistair returned from London a week later, he noticed nothing at first. The house was immaculate. The staff were efficient. His dinner was served on time. Everything was in its proper place. The machine was running perfectly. It took him 3 days to realize that the soul of the machine was gone. The first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the usual formal silence of their shared spaces, but a new, deeper quiet. Before, there had been sounds. The distant notes of the pianoforte as she played for herself in the late afternoons. The rustle of her skirts in the hallway. The low murmur of her voice as she spoke with the housekeeper. Now, there was nothing. The pianoforte remained closed, gathering a thin film of dust on its polished lid. He never seemed to encounter her in the corridors anymore. He did not hear her voice. It was as if she had mastered the art of complete and total self-effacement. At dinner, she was present physically, but her absence was a palpable force. She no longer observed the room. Her gaze was fixed on her plate. She answered his direct questions with polite, monosyllabic answers. "Was your day agreeable?" he might ask. For the sake of form, yes. "Did the new curtains arrive for the guest wing?" Yes. There was no elaboration, no opinion, no spark of the intelligence he had found so irritating and yet, he was beginning to realize, so enlivening. The woman who had debated crop rotation and quoted Jethro Tull had vanished. In her place was the meek, unremarkable cipher he had thought he was marrying. He had gotten exactly what he wanted. He found it intolerable. The change extended beyond her interactions with him. He saw it in the house itself. The small touches that he had never consciously registered were gone. The fresh flowers that had always graced the mantelpiece were absent. The books in the drawing room were perfectly aligned, but they were no longer the ones she had been reading. There was an orderliness to the house now that felt sterile, like a museum rather than a home. He found himself searching for her, not to speak with her, but simply to observe her, to confirm she still existed. He would see her in the gardens, walking alone, her head bent, never looking up. He saw her in the small chapel, sitting in a pew, her hands folded in her lap, perfectly still. She was a portrait of a duchess, beautiful and remote, and utterly lifeless. One afternoon, he came across Mr. Finch in the hall. The old man was looking down a long corridor with a sad, troubled expression. Alistair followed his gaze and saw Eleanor at the far end, speaking with a young maid. He could not hear her words, but he saw her place a hand on the girl's arm before turning and disappearing into a room. "She has a good heart, the Duchess," Finch said, more to himself than to Alistair. "A kind heart." "Has something happened?" Alistair asked, a strange sense of unease creeping over him. Finch turned, his watery eyes meeting the Duke's. "The girl's brother was injured in a logging accident, Your Grace." Her Grace arranged for the estate physician to attend to him, and she gave the girl her own wages for the week, so she would not worry about the family's needs while she was here working. The estate manager paused. She did not want you to be troubled with it. She did not want you to be troubled with it. The phrase echoed in Alistair's mind. It was more than courtesy. It was a policy. She was actively managing his world to keep herself and the messy, human details of life out of it. She has become quiet, Alistair stated, testing the word. Finch's expression was unreadable, but his voice was heavy, with a meaning Alistair could not quite grasp. A person can only beat against a locked door for so long, Your Grace. Eventually, they stop knocking. They simply accept that it will not be opened to them. The old man bowed and shuffled away, leaving Alistair alone in the corridor with his words hanging in the air like a death sentence. A locked door. What door had he locked? He thought about the crop rotation. He thought about his dismissal of her knowledge. He thought about the coldness he had deliberately cultivated between them. He thought about his long absences. He saw a pattern of behavior, a series of small rejections and dismissals that, when strung together, formed a chain. But it felt like more than that. The change in her was too absolute, too sudden. It was not a gradual retreat. It was a slammed door. Something had happened. Some specific event had triggered this complete and total withdrawal. He began to search for it, driven by an urgency he did not understand. He retraced his steps. He retraced hers. He spoke to the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, a woman whose loyalty was to the house itself. "The Duchess seems subdued," he said, attempting a casual tone. Mrs. Gable pressed her lips into a thin line. "Her Grace is a very private person, Your Grace. She keeps her own counsel." The statement was a perfectly polite wall. She would reveal nothing. His investigation led him nowhere. He was a man accustomed to solving problems with logic and authority. But this was a problem of the heart, a territory in which he was a complete novice. He was adrift in a sea of unspoken things. The breaking point came in the library. He was looking for a map of the estate's northern territories, and in his frustration, he started pulling down boxes from the higher shelves, something he would normally have a footman do. His hand fell upon a pine crate labeled Trustee Correspondence 1836. He opened it, not knowing what he was looking for. He saw the bundle tied with ribbon. Marriage settlement. He untied it. He sifted through the letters, his own crisp handwriting, a familiar sight. And then he saw it. The letter to Sedgwick. He read his own words, and it was like listening to a stranger. A cold, arrogant, cruel stranger. A necessary acquisition. Apparent meekness. A broodmare. He saw the words not as he had written them as a pragmatic, if callous, assessment meant for a private audience, but as she must have seen them, as a definitive, damning judgment of her worth as a human being. And then he noticed it, the faintest of changes in the paper. The letter had been folded and unfolded one more time than the others in the bundle. The creases were slightly softer, the paper along the folds a fraction more worn. It was an almost imperceptible detail, but to his newly awakened senses, it screamed at him. She had found it. She had read it. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. He stumbled back and sat heavily in the reading chair, the letter clutched in his hand. Everything snapped into place. The sudden silence, the averted eyes, the lifeless politeness, the death of the music. It all dated from his return from London. From the moment she had discovered the precise architecture of his contempt for her, he had not simply insulted her intelligence in his study that day. He had, in writing, codified his belief in her utter worthlessness beyond her womb. He had authored the very document that had broken her spirit. He thought about the woman who knew Tull's work on husbandry. He thought about the musician who could master Bach. He thought about the quiet manager who had brought harmony to his chaotic household. He thought about the compassionate soul who had comforted a weeping maid and cared for an injured tenant. He had taken that woman, a person of substance and intellect and kindness, and he had dismissed her as a broodmare. A wave of self-loathing, so intense it made him physically sick, washed over him. It was not just that he had been wrong. He had been a fool, a blind, arrogant, monumental fool. His carefully constructed world of logic and control was a sham, built on a foundation of profound ignorance. He had failed to see the most valuable asset he had ever possessed, an asset that was sitting right in front of him, breathing the same air. He looked at the letter in his hand, at the cruel, careless words he had written. Her signature means nothing. He had been so proud of that line, of its finality. Now he saw it for what it was, the epitaph for his own humanity. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he had to find her. Not to apologize what apology could possibly suffice, but to confess. To stand before her and admit the full, catastrophic scale of his failure. He found her in the conservatory. It was a vast, neglected structure of glass and iron at the back of the manor, filled with the ghosts of long-dead exotic plants. The air was damp and smelled of earth and decay. She was standing by a stone bench, wiping the grime from a pane of glass with a cloth, her back to him. She was wearing a simple gray dress, and the pale afternoon light filtering through the dirty glass made her seem ethereal, almost transparent. He stopped in the doorway, his heart pounding in his chest. For a moment, he could not speak. He was the Duke of Blackwood, a man who commanded audiences with ministers and kings, and he was terrified of this small, quiet woman. "Eleanor," he said. Her name felt foreign on his tongue. He had never used it before. She stiffened but did not turn around. "Your Grace," she replied, her voice flat, devoid of all emotion. He walked slowly towards her, his footsteps echoing on the stone floor. He held the letter in his hand. I found this." She finally turned, her eyes falling on the piece of paper. There was no surprise in her expression, only a profound, weary stillness. She knew what it was. "I see," she said. He stood before her, the gulf between them wider than any ocean. He had rehearsed nothing. There were no words for what he had to say, but he had to say it. "I have been a fool," he began, his voice rough. "A blind, arrogant fool. There is no other word for it. I read these words, my words, and I do not recognize the man who wrote them. Or rather, I do, and I am ashamed of him." She said nothing. She simply watched him, her winter sky eyes giving away nothing of her thoughts. "I judged you without knowing you," he continued, the confession tearing from him. "I dismissed you without seeing you. I looked at you, and I saw a convenience, a solution to a problem. I did not see a person. I did not see your intelligence, or your kindness, or your strength. I failed to see anything of value. And for that colossal failure of perception, I am responsible." He did not say he was sorry. The word was too small, too easy. It was a word for bumping into someone in a hallway, not for shattering their soul. "I was wrong," he said, and the two words were the heaviest he had ever lifted. About everything. About the crop rotation. About the pianoforte. About the household. About you. I was utterly, completely, and inexcusably wrong. He held out the letter. "This is a document of my own ignorance. I want you to burn it." Eleanor looked at the letter, then back at his face. She saw the genuine anguish there, the raw self-recrimination. She saw a man who had been stripped of his arrogance, left standing in the ruins of his own certainty. She did not take the letter. Burning a piece of paper does not change the words that were written on it. "Your Grace," she said, her voice still quiet, but with a new edge of steel. Nor does it change the sentiment behind them. That sentiment was the foundation of our marriage. It is written into the contract we both signed. She gestured vaguely towards the house. Clause 17b. He flinched as if she had struck him. She was right. His confession was meaningless as long as the legal codification of his contempt remained in force. "I will have it revoked," he said instantly. I will call the trustees tomorrow. I will tear up the entire marriage settlement, and we will draw up a new one that recognizes you as my partner, as the true Duchess of Blackwood. Will you? She asked, a flicker of something, cynicism, perhaps in her eyes. And what will you tell Lord Sedgwick? That your broodmare has developed a surprising aptitude for estate management. The word, her word, spoken aloud, was like a whip. He deserved it. He deserved every ounce of her scorn. I will tell him that I was a fool who was fortunate enough to marry a woman far superior to him in every way, he said, his voice low and intense, and that if he does not agree, I will buy out his trusteeship and throw him off the board. I will tell him that my wife's signature is now the only one that matters on this estate, besides my own. He took a step closer. This is not about the estate, Eleanor. Not anymore. This is about the fact that I have spent weeks living in a house that has felt like a tomb because the best part of it had gone silent. I did not realize until I could no longer hear your music how much I had come to rely on it. I did not realize until I no longer saw your influence how much it had improved my home and my life. I did not realize until you were no longer there how much I needed you to be. He finally met her gaze, holding it, willing her to see the truth of what he was saying. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I have not earned it. I am not asking for your trust. I have broken it. I am asking only for a chance to show you the man I am now, not the man I was when I wrote that vile letter, a chance to learn how to see. Eleanor held his gaze for a long time. The silence in the dusty conservatory stretched on, thick with unspoken history. She saw the desperation in his eyes, but she also saw a glimmer of something else, a nascent humility, a painful and genuine dawning of awareness. She did not give him an answer. She did not smile or offer a hand. She simply gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, and for Alistair, it was more than enough. It was a beginning. The next morning, Alistair did exactly as he had promised. He sent an express rider to London, summoning Lord Sedgwick and the other trustee to an emergency meeting at Blackwood. He instructed Mr. Abernathy to begin drafting a new marriage settlement, with Clause 17b not merely struck, but replaced by a new clause that gave the Duchess full and equal authority in all matters pertaining to the estate. Eleanor watched all of this from a distance. She did not participate. She did not offer encouragement. She was an observer, waiting to see if his actions would truly match his words. The door inside her remained locked, but she was, perhaps, standing near it, listening for the sound of a key turning in the lock. The meeting with the trustees was a battle. Lord Sedgwick was apoplectic. "Have you lost your senses, Blackwood?" he blustered, his face turning a blotchy purple. "To give a woman that kind of power, after we took such pains to prevent it? It is madness. She has clearly bewitched you." Alistair remained perfectly calm. He sat at the head of the table in his study, the same table where Eleanor had signed the original contract, and regarded Sedgwick with a look of cold pity. "On the contrary, Sedgwick," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "I have, for the first time in my life, come to my senses. The Duchess possesses an intelligence for these matters that, frankly, eclipses your own. Her plan for the West Valley Farms, which I have instructed Finch to implement immediately, is more insightful than anything this board has proposed in a decade." He slid a document across the table. "This is my directive. You will sign it, or you will tender your resignation. The choice is yours, but the outcome will be the same. The Duchess is my partner in all things. That is my final word on the matter." Faced with the Duke's iron will and the threat of public humiliation, the trustees capitulated. They signed. The old contract was nullified. The new one was put in its place. That evening, Alistair brought the new document to Eleanor. He found her not in the conservatory, but in the drawing room, standing before the closed pianoforte. She had been dusting the keys. He laid the document on a nearby table. "It is done," he said simply. "Your signature now has as much weight as mine. More, on any day you choose." She looked at the document, then at him. "You fought for it," she said. It was a statement, not a question. News traveled fast in a great house. "I fought for what was right," he corrected her. "Something I should have done from the very beginning." He did not press her. He did not ask for a reaction. He simply left the document there, a tangible symbol of his changed heart, and retreated to his study, giving her the space she needed. He was learning, slowly and painfully, the art of patience. The next day, he was reviewing plans for a new mill when there was a knock on his study door. It was Eleanor. "May I?" she asked, hovering at the threshold. "Of course," he said, his heart leaping into his throat. "Please." She came in and walked over to the desk, looking at the architectural drawings. "The current is too slow at that bend in the river," she said, her voice still quiet, but now analytical, engaged. "You will lose half your power. If you move it a quarter-mile downstream, just past the old weir, the fall of the water is steeper. Your output will be nearly double." He looked at the map, then at the plans, and saw that she was, once again, absolutely right. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with a genuine gratitude that had nothing to do with the mill. "I had not seen that." Perhaps you simply needed someone else to look at the map," she suggested, a ghost of a smile touching her lips for the first time in weeks. It was the turning of the key. The rebuilding of their marriage was not a sudden event, but a slow, meticulous process, like the restoration of the neglected conservatory. It was built day by day, conversation by conversation. He brought her the estate ledgers, and they worked on them together, side by side at the great mahogany desk. He asked for her opinion on everything, from tenant disputes to political appointments. And he listened, truly listened, to her answers. She, in turn, began to emerge from her self-imposed exile. The music returned to the house, first as hesitant scales, then as tentative melodies, and finally as the glorious, complex fugues that had so captivated him before. Flowers reappeared on the mantelpieces. Laughter was heard in the halls. She began to oversee the restoration of the conservatory, her knowledge of botany transforming the decaying structure into a vibrant, living space. He learned about her past, about the scholarly father who had taught her Latin and mathematics, about her love for logic and patterns, which she found in both music and agriculture. He learned about her quiet strength, her resilience, her deep well of compassion that she had always hidden from a world that had no use for it. She learned about him, too. She saw past the arrogant duke to the man underneath, a man burdened by duty and trapped by a lifetime of emotional detachment. She saw his genuine remorse and his determined, almost painstaking efforts to become a man worthy of her respect. One evening, a year after their wedding, they were sitting together in the now thriving conservatory. The air was warm and fragrant with the scent of jasmine and orange blossoms. The setting sun cast long, golden rays through the clean glass panes. They were reading, a comfortable silence between them. The silence of companionship, not of distance. He reached across and took her hand. She looked up from her book, her eyes, no longer guarded, meeting his. "I love you, Eleanor," he said, the words simple, direct, and utterly true. "I know I have no right to say it, but I must. I love your mind and your music and your quiet grace. I love the way you see the world. You have taught me how to see it too." She did not reply immediately. She looked at their joined hands, then back at his face. A genuine, radiant smile spread across her face, transforming her features from merely pretty to truly beautiful. "And I love you, Alistair," she replied, her voice clear and strong. "The man you have become." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture of reverence and devotion. The transaction was long over. In its place, a partnership had been forged, one built not on a meaningless signature, but on a foundation of mutual sight, of profound and enduring recognition. The Duke had finally learned the true value of his Duchess, and in doing so, had discovered his own. The Blackwood estate flourished as never before, a testament to their shared vision. And in the grand hall, hanging opposite the grim tapestry of the boar hunt, a new portrait was commissioned. The Duke and Duchess, standing together, their hands clasped, looking not at the artist, but at each other, their expressions speaking of a quiet, unshakable harmony. They were, at last, a matched pair. If you made it to the end of their story, tell me in the comments. If you were Eleanor, what one condition would you have insisted upon before agreeing to rebuild the relationship? In our next story, a reclusive marquess, scarred by a fire that took his family, hires a companion for his silent, withdrawn sister. But the woman who arrives is not the meek spinster he was expecting. She is a disgraced artist with a scandalous past, and she seems more interested in the locked wing of the manor than in her new charge. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more tales of love, loss, and the slow, beautiful work of learning to see. They arrive here, whenever they are ready.